coming to you live from WBKB Studios in Alpena. It's Michigan's first Congressional District Candidates Forum, featuring Republican candidates Tom Casperson, Jason Allen, Jack Bergman, and for the Democrats we have General Jerry Cannon and Lon Johnson. And now, here's your moderator, Tim Kuhnlein.
Welcome to the Congressional Primary Forum for the 1st Congressional District of Michigan. I'm your moderator, Tim Kuhnlein. The purpose of this forum is to meet both Democratic and Republican candidates taking part in the August 2nd primary election. The August primary is a partisan primary. The point of this forum is to help those who choose to vote on Republican or Democratic tickets decide which of the candidates here tonight for each party should run in the general election on November 8th against one another. The Republican and Democrat elected from this panel will run against one another in the November general election. The candidate elected in the general election will then serve for 2 years as one of 435 members in the United States House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., representing we the people of the 1st Congressional District of Michigan. This evening's forum is divided into 2 segments. First, candidates will be asked a series of 5 questions based on issues posed by viewers of Channel 11 and citizens of the district, covering a range of issues relevant to the congressional district. Each candidate will be afforded no more than a 2-minute response to each question. Alpena County Clerk Bonnie Fredericks is graciously serving as timekeeper. A drawing has determined the sequence of questioning. Democratic candidates will go first, followed by Republican candidates after a brief commercial break. There will be no rebuttals nor exchanges between candidates in either segment. In closing, each candidate will be afforded a closing statement of 30 seconds. So let's begin with the first question. We'll start with Lon Johnson. A lot of people are worried about the environment. Others, not so much. The Enbridge pipeline, fracking, invasive species, freshwater supplies, the purity of our Great Lakes are examples of concerns. The question is, what are the most pressing environmental issues relative to Michigan and the 1st Congressional District in your mind, and what do you propose we do about them?
Well, by far and away, it's protecting our fresh water. You know, we're home to 21% of the world's fresh water. That's a competitive advantage that we have over every other state and, frankly, over every other country. We have a duty to protect that fresh water. But also we have an opportunity to show the world how to use and protect that fresh water. I believe that we need to, number one, we need to shut down Line 5. We have a 63-year-old oil pipeline running through the Straits of Mackinac that hasn't been independently inspected. Number two, I believe that we shouldn't be fracking. You know, we're using millions of gallons of our fresh water, putting it under the ground. We'll never get that water back for a set amount of natural gas. We need to discover ways to get that natural gas out, but do it without using the fresh water that they're putting down into the ground, mixing with chemicals. And third, we've got to address invasive species. You know, we here in Alpena, we have obviously a connection to the fishing industry. If we were to have fishing and tourism industry, if we were to allow invasive species to get into our waters, our economy would be forever harmed. You know, but the last but not least, what we need to do is to create a freshwater institute to show the world how to use and protect fresh water. You know, in our lifetime, fresh water will be the most valuable natural resource in the history of mankind. And we have the ability to show the world how to use and protect fresh water. If we can create a freshwater institute, we can take advantage of that and show the world how to use and protect it. The same way that Stanford University created Silicon Valley, or how Nashville aggregated country music, we can show the world how to use and protect fresh water. And by doing so, do two things. One, recreate an entirely new economy up here, and second, protect our fresh water.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cannon.
Well, first of all, the environment is absolutely essential to the livelihood of everybody that lives in northern Michigan, those that come to visit as well. And so finding the right balance between keeping the lights on, so to speak, and protecting our environment. We can never do anything that's going to be at the expense of the environment. So we don't want to do anything that's going to cause us to lose jobs or employment opportunities, but we need to find that right balance between economic opportunity and protecting the environment. So the environment is number one in everything that we have to do. And we have a great diverse economy here, and we have to play to our strengths. And one of them is absolutely the Great Lakes. It's one of the biggest industries that we have in northern Michigan. We've got timber, we've got agriculture, we've got tourism. And so we all love to look out our windows and see all the great water that we have, usually within a few miles of our homes, and obviously the Great Lakes as well. So if anything was to happen to the Great Lakes, and there's all kinds of issues to be concerned about, both internally and externally. For example, the agreement with Wisconsin to begin to draw water out of the Great Lakes sets a great precedent that we need to really keep an eye on, where people can draw water away from the Great Lakes. That's something that I was surprised that the governor agreed to, but it is what it is. We just need to, that water is supposed to be coming back, fine. We need to monitor that very, very closely. But again, our environment is absolutely essential to the lifeblood of our community, our environment, our communities. We depend on it in so many different ways that has to always be the priority, protecting our water.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question will go first to Mr. Cannon. There's a lot of frustration about the cost of health care in our country. Despite the efforts of the Affordable Care Act, we continue to see health care costs increase and exceed inflation year after year. The question is, what do you think Congress should or can do about the increase in costs of health care in America?
Well, the first thing we cannot do is put profits over people. You know, I sit on a hospital board over in my community, Kalkaska, and the Affordable Care Act was a compromise. It did not address all the things that needed to be addressed, as usually happens in legislation. It was a compromise. It's an imperfect law. It needs to be revised, reformed, amended, whatever we need to do. But the most important thing is to make sure that we don't forego profits. We don't forego patient care over the profits of insurance companies. And you know, when I was the sheriff in Kalkaska, every year people seem to forget that insurance premiums were going up 10, 15, 20% a year. And the Affordable Care Act sort of tried to address some of that. Obviously, maybe we're back into that realm again as well. But I can tell you, sitting on the hospital board, we were losing money and with charity care. Since the Affordable Care Act, that charity care has gone down. Preventive measures have gone up. Everybody's doing much better because of that. What Congress can do is go back and revisit this law and be serious about it. And this takes probably moral courage and probably political courage to do the right thing. It's about taking care of the people first and foremost in everything that we do. In healthcare, in the industrialized world, we're the only ones that are struggling with this issue. We can get after this if we want to. It should not, it's a moral issue. It should not be a political issue. It is what it is. And I would make it a high priority for myself to make sure that we gave this the attention it deserves.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Well, specifically, we need to do three things. One, we need to address the rising costs of prescription drug care, prescription drug costs. We need to give Medicare the ability to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. We don't allow that now. That's unacceptable, and I think we could reduce the cost of prescription drug medications if we could allow Medicare the ability to negotiate with drug companies. We allow that for other government agencies, but not Medicare. You know, we're looking at somewhere in the savings of 20 to 30%. Second, we need to simplify our administration of health care. You know, billing and administrative costs are driving up, are responsible for quite a bit of this inflation that we're seeing for the cost of health care. We've got to simplify. And third, we need to give patients the ability, customers, us, the ability to negotiate and go out of state for health care plans. You know, we only limit health care insurance companies. We're only allowed to go to those companies that are in our state. We need to open that up and allow customers to shop around and create a nationwide competition for health care, which would drive down the costs.
Okay, just quickly, is it fair to say then on the issue of Social Security and Medicare, if I offered you the option reform or privatize, your position would be?
Well, privatization is horrible. It would devastate it would devastate Social Security. You know, we have too many politicians willing right now to risk Social Security on Wall Street schemes, and I would be absolutely opposed to privatizing Social Security.
Okay, Mr. Cannon, reform or privatize?
I would say I would be against privatization. There's obviously room for improvement in any program, but it's a very effective program already. And the way to sustain it and prolong its lifeline is to raise the income cap. And but I would be against privatizing Social Security and Medicare for that matter.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the next question will start with Mr. Johnson. Northeast Michigan is one of the most challenged regions of Michigan and the country in terms of economic statistics. As a freshman congressman with partisan hierarchies to contend with, what do you foresee as your role in helping Northeast Michigan move ahead economically?
You know, one of the largest, I think, duties of a member of Congress is to convene. You're a convening agent. You can bring together private industry, local governments, county governments, state governments, federal governments, and private, nonprofit entities to the table to create a vision for where we want to be 5, 10, and 15 years down the road. You know, we need to create a place where our families can stay and succeed. Too many of our kids and our grandkids are going downstate or out of state for jobs or for education opportunities. Specifically, that means a number of things. One, we need to return passenger rail service back to Northeast Michigan. We used these lines for decades to export lumber value. Now we need those same lines to bring people up here to spend money, tourists. Two, we need to bring high-speed internet and mobile cell phone service to all our communities. You know, we're massively moving as an economy where people can live and work wherever they choose, and we're not prepared to bring people here to have access to mobile phones and internet service. This just wasn't invented last year. The internet and mobile cell phone service, it's here to stay, and it's how people are conducting commerce, and we need to bring that here. And third, I believe that we need to create a freshwater institute to show the world how to use and protect fresh water. To show our military how to move more troops using less water. Show the agriculture industry, how do you grow more product using less water. Show manufacturing, how do you make more widgets using less water. And from that, we can create the engineering and jobs of the future and protect our Great Lakes. And I'd like to also say something about, I'd like to compliment Governor Snyder today, who sent a letter to the congressional delegation calling on them to support the funding of another Sioux Lock. Okay,
thank you. Mr. Cannon.
Well, I agree that northeastern lower Michigan is struggling, as many areas in the district are. Rural America is struggling. The entire effort seems to be in urban areas and suburban areas, and so it's a priority for us to be at the bully pulpit and to make a lot of noise about things that we want to see. I would love to see, if it's not already there, a rural caucus about issues. We all share the same concerns across the country. But the best answers aren't in Washington, and the best answers are not in Lansing for that matter. But the federal government can be a better partner, can be an enabler. The best answers are really here at the local level. And we need to embrace innovation. We need to enable homegrown businesses, startups, some fast-growing businesses that are in the community, do the kinds of things that are going to help them be more successful, hire people to expand. We need federal policies that are going to strengthen Main Street, not so much Wall Street, Main Street. And by keeping interest rates low, so the local businesses can get started, can expand, can do all the things that we would hope that they would be able to do. Our economic engine in northern Michigan is small businesses. So that's where we got to focus. We play to our strengths. Obviously, we got some great natural resources, but Main Street's where we're going to get, that's the majority of our jobs in northern Michigan. And so the federal monetary policy can create a strong economy, but good trade policy can kind of seal the deal. And that's what we need to do and bring that to northeastern lower Michigan.
Thank you very much. The next question will start with you, Mr. Cannon. This is a little bit of a different topic, probably. Michigan has been subject to gerrymandering throughout its history. Both parties are guilty of engaging in the partisanship that impacts our state and federal districting. The question is, what should or could be done to stem the tide of partisan dominance in redistricting every 10 years?
Well, this is a long-standing problem, and you're absolutely right, Tim. Both sides have played this game. And of course, if you're on the losing end of that proposition, you scream the loudest. What we need to do is create, we got to take the politics out of it. And we just need to kind of create, what happens, I think the end result is that because of the gerrymandering, the party that's got the majority only worries about the primary race, and they can ignore the smaller percentage, whatever it is, 40, 45%. That's wrong. We need to listen to everybody. So if you're going to be an elected official, you need to share everybody's interest and concern. And so we need to create a separate entity, and this has been done elsewhere in the country, that it's not political, it's fair. How to make these districts as equal as you possibly can. Understanding that in some areas it's just not going to work, but in many others you can. The majority of the people in Michigan voted Democratic, but our congressional delegation doesn't reflect that. And so trying to be very progressive in this idea of trying to make sure that everybody has equal and fair representation, that their voice will be heard, that their representative is interested in their concerns, and we'll seek that out and to try to represent the best interest of everybody. And it's not necessarily going to be a simple deal, but creating a separate body that would do the demographics after the census and try to make these districts as equal as possible and avoid these spaghetti districts that meander all over the place where people have absolutely nothing in common.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Johnson.
I think very simply we got to get the politicians out of the business of drawing their own lines. They are choosing their own constituents instead of constituents choosing which lines that they want to be associated with. It is, I think, is in large part responsible for the partisan bickering that we've seen in Washington and in Lansing. You know, when you have lines that have been drawn to favor one party or the other, routinely what you're having is politicians that are going to Lansing or Washington, and they're disincentivized from cooperating, and that's the only way we're going to get anything done in either Lansing or Washington is to redraw these lines and have an independent body do so. That's not partisan. Also we need to get rid of campaign. We've got to get rid of corporate money in politics. We've got to end this Citizens United decision that allowed corporations to pour billions of dollars unreported into our political system. That's why I'm proud to have the endorsement of End Citizens United, an organization that's dedicated to that.
Okay, thank you. Just quickly with the time that we have in this segment, any thoughts on term limits for U.S. Congress? Let's start with you, Mr. Johnson.
Well, we have term limits. Those occur every 2 years in election. We were served very well here for 18 years by Congressman Stupak, and as he served longer in Washington, so did his ability to get things done and deliver for this district. I'm proud to have his support and his endorsement in this election.
Okay, Mr. Cannon, term limits?
Well, I agree that we do have term limits, and the moment that a person goes to Washington and starts thinking about how they can stay there, they've already lost their way. I think you go there, you do the right things for the right reasons, and people will keep you. And if they don't keep you, that's fine. You go home with a clear conscience that you did the best you could. And so I would be against term limits per se.
Okay, thank you. This will be the last formal question, and depending on the timing, we may have a few more. And the question will start with Mr. Johnson. Regardless of a Clinton or Trump presidency, what role does Congress have with regard to foreign policy, and what policy agendas do you think are most important to your constituents?
Well, number one, in terms of foreign policy, I think our Congress has an enormous responsibility to review our foreign policy and to make, depending on obviously which branch, the Senate or the House, but to help make policy with the executive on foreign policy via legislation and appropriation. As someone who was in Iraq in 2005, I came home in 2006 as a civilian. I saw firsthand the problems that we face fighting terrorism and in the Middle East. I believe that a member of Congress should be knowledgeable about that and should speak up. As far as the responsibility for a member of Congress to their district. It's casework. It's making sure that our towns and our counties are getting their share of federal dollars. And then on the individual level, it's making sure that our constituents are getting the right services, whether it's Social Security or help from the VA that they need.
On the foreign policy issue, there's often a struggle over the issue of the Alpena Combat Readiness Training Center and keeping it open among the other 4 training bases of the Air National Guard. Would you consider saving Alpena's air base at the expense of the other 3 if necessary?
Well, Senator Levin fought for years to keep this open, and it's a big economic driver for this region, and I don't think that it's an either-or discussion. Senator Levin, while we don't have Senator Levin there, we also have Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters there, and I don't think it's an either-or.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cannon, on the original question of Congress and its role in foreign policy, what do you think is the most important issue in foreign policy for your constituents?
Well, I think across the nation, and probably around the world, I think terrorism has stolen the spotlight and taken the oxygen out of the room as far as foreign policy. And so, for me, I think Congress has a responsibility to make sure that the appropriate agencies are staffed and funded at the appropriate level. As a military officer, I served in Iraq on 2 different occasions. I know and worked hard with the embassy to try to establish and redefine the role of government in Iraq. And so, making sure that when the military is involved, the resources are pretty unlimited, but the State Department doesn't have the resources that they should have had to do some of those things. So Congress has a responsibility to make sure that the funds are available to do what needs to be done. And there's a budgetary process, and there's priority, and when we have 2 juxtaposed entities politically, the executive branch and the House of Representatives, for example, obviously the best interest of all these federal agencies is probably not going to come to the forefront. And so as far as Alpena Combat Readiness Center, this is just like all of our National Guard. We have no federal bases left in the state. And so the National Guard bases that we do have, Selfridge and Alpena and the Army down in Custer and over at Camp Grayling, these are instrumental. These are facilities that we need to have, and it's all about readiness. We want to make sure that our troops are well-equipped, well-trained, and ready to do our nation's bidding whenever they're called upon to do so.
Okay, thank you. We have a little bit of time left. I want to switch to education. There's a lot of concern about education in this country, secondary higher education, but a common theme is that education is too costly, especially higher ed. As a congressman, what is the solution to the cost problem in education?
Well, we've shifted our funding off many of our universities and community colleges. We've shifted it off the state and onto the student, which is requiring them to take greater and greater amounts of debt. We need to increase our funding of higher education, number 1. Number 2, we need to help these students with their debt level. We've got to increase the Pell Grants, number 1. Number 2, allow these students to create, to refinance their loans or to develop other plans that they can pay over time or a percentage of their income.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cannon, just briefly.
I think one of the things we got to make sure that we take advantage of is that in high school we got to start talking about everybody doesn't need to go to 4-year college. Almost everybody doesn't want to. So we got great community colleges that we need to encourage people to take advantage of. That small degree can help offset the cost of the larger degree. But I also feel that a lot of the burden is on the states. But the federal government can make sure that the federal government should not be making money off student loans from their different grant programs. But they need to make sure that those programs are available and that they're equitable and that students have an opportunity to apply and get those funds and renegotiate those rates as necessary. Keep those rates as low as possible so we're just covering the expense of educating our future generations.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Johnson will start 30 seconds for a closing statement.
Well, Washington's lost its way. Our Congress is too often fighting for the wealthy and the well-connected, and the results are disastrous for our country. We're seeing corporations that are moving our jobs overseas. We're seeing politicians risking our Social Security on Wall Street. We need to send a member of Congress that's going to go there and fight for us. You know, Northern Michigan, we have always led the world, whether it was lumber or mining or in our water resources. We need to lead the world again, and that's why I ask for your vote on August 2nd.
Thank you. Mr. Cannon.
Well, every election is important, and equally important is that we do our homework and we get out and vote. And I ask everybody to look at all candidates, examine their body of work, their education, their experience, their community credentials, and ask yourself these questions. Is a candidate really connected to our community? What have they done for others? Do they share our values? Do they have real-world experience? And can they make realistic and sensible decisions at the national level? I have, I can, I will. My name is Jerry Cannon. I ask for your vote on August 2nd. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with the Republican portion of this forum after these commercials.
Well, nobody stood here.
Okay.
You good on the mics? Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Hello, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Test.
Jason, Jason. Allen, Allen.
Keep going. Good evening. My name is Jason Allen. Thank you very much for allowing us to be here.
Welcome back to this congressional primary forum. I'd like to welcome the Republican candidates for the second half of the forum. We'll begin with Mr. Bergman on the first question. A lot of people are worried about the environment, others not so much. The Enbridge pipeline, fracking, invasive species, freshwater supplies, purity of our Great Lakes are examples of concerns. The question is, what are the most pressing environmental issues relative to Michigan in the 1st Congressional District in your mind, and what do you propose we do about them?
Thanks for the question, Tim. Look at our thousands of miles of shoreline. Look at our probably equally large number of miles of inland waterways. Water, number one. If we don't preserve our water, conserve how we manage it, that would be, in my mind, our number one environmental issue in the 1st District. Second only by our woodlands, which we manage, because if you don't manage the resources you have, eventually something bad will happen. With the technology that we have available today to not only predict, but to evaluate the quality of our water, the quality of our soil, the quality of those natural pests who would be invasive to our area, we have the ability to manage it very successfully. So I would propose that, number one, we partner with those environmental agencies who should exist and those businesses who seek to utilize our resources so that we come up with the best economic results as well as environmental results.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Casperson.
Yes, thank you for having this. The environment is important. I think water is probably the pristine part of our environment in this region. We talk a lot about it, and I don't know of anybody that wants to hurt it. I would be concerned and be very careful that as we talk about environmental issues that there's a balance, and it really involves our way of life. And I think a lot of people live here because of the great outdoors and the natural resources that we hold dear, but it's both sides. Our industry relies on natural resources. The recreational side, we all rely on natural resources. So as we move forward, I think you have to have and make sure we have a balance as to the use of those natural resources and the protection of the natural resources. And what I mean by that, having served on natural resources and actually chaired that in the Senate, it's been a big issue for us, and especially Michigan. Michigan is one of the leading states when it comes to natural resources overall. And so there is a concern about it, but I can't emphasize enough the balance. As we move forward and we put protections in place, that they're common sense oriented and that they make sense for all the people of Michigan and the country. And our country is vast with natural resources, and that applies across the board. And we've seen it directly here in Michigan. And I think as we move forward, it needs to be something that's a high priority, and it needs to be economically looked at as well as preservation and protection.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your station for allowing us to be here. When you start taking a look at these issues on a federal level, the breadth is daunting. My first biggest concern is the ability for now us to expand the aspects of exporting water in the most recent rulings on the Wisconsin case. Because when you look at the ability for us to preserve the next generation of water, the ability to stop exportation because of the precedents being set is of great concern. Then we start taking a look at the exotic species in the water area and whether you are in favor of some sort of ballast coming in, but we have to come up with a way to stop exotic species coming into the Great Lakes, because that has got huge implications on the aquifer and what it is going to be doing to the quality. We're already seeing that with degradation in certain parts of area on the types of species of fish in the Great Lakes. We are starting to see those affecting our inland lakes. Then the next thing that we've got to start taking a look at is seriously is how do we prepare the next generation to be good stewards? When you look at the declining number of people doing hunting and fishing, and like my colleagues, we've spent a lot of times in the woods and enjoying those, but we have to make sure that our youth are able to get out and enjoy those activities, because the access to both federal and state lands is invaluable for our economy and also for the pristine aspects of our country. When you look at the ability to get on the trails and do horse riding, when you look at the ability of Boy Scout troops to be out in the field, like myself as an Eagle Scout, we've got to make sure that the next generation is prepared. And then finally, the aspect of us being able to make sure that we have good, solid energy resources is invaluable.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question will start with Mr. Casperson. There is a lot of frustration about the cost of health care in our country, despite the efforts of the Affordable Care Act. We continue to see health care costs increase and exceed inflation year after year. What do you think Congress should or can do about the increasing costs of health care in America?
Sure. I think, first of all, we need to take a look at Obamacare, and I think it needs to be repealed in its form. I remember the debate, and the debate was it's too much at one time, there's too much in it, and people didn't even know what was in it. And so we've seen that play out now in our country, and we've watched healthcare costs rise at an alarming rate, just the opposite of what we were told. I think the approach needs to be that we take and start over in the sense of, instead of one big fellow swoop, we should be looking at all kinds of concepts that could help. The insurance issue across state lines is a prime example of something that was left behind and we didn't look at. I think as we go forward, and whoever gets into this office and the next class coming in cannot just say repeal Obamacare. They have to have ideas on how we fix this thing and bring it back to the people and make it affordable. That's one way. We're hearing doctors now that are starting to look at their practices, general practitioners, are starting to offer health care in a sense through their own office. And I think it's a pretty inventive way of providing some health care for people. They're offering so much a month for a family and so much a month for a single, and really carving the middle guy right out of it, the insurance company, and providing health care. Those things are innovative ways that we can do it differently and offer health care for people at an affordable rate. I think the more we can think outside the box like that, we'll bring this back under control. But to leave Obamacare in place as we see it today is unacceptable because it clearly has failed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much. Obamacare needs to be repealed. And then we'll have to allow for local options. And as you know, at our Alpena Regional Medical Facility, with the new partnerships that are available and ability to access care, the first thing is coming up with the best practices. And we know on an international and national basis that there are certain types of treatments that different hospitals do well, and we've got to allow for those treatments to be taken care of and managed in such a manner that the best practices are used. Then from there, we've got to take and have a heart for those that have pre-existing conditions, families that have diabetes, certain types of serious illnesses from genetics, and put that into a separate classification. And then from there, go in and really start taking a look at allowing families and individuals and individual businesses to make those decisions on the best way to do health care. Medical care savings accounts, if appropriately implemented, allow families to make choices. They allow for competition. They allow for individuals to go in and take a look at who's got the best ability to do health care. Much of personal responsibility in health care goes back to how individuals manage those benefits and the care practice. And so the key is to allow for personal choice with some sort of a major care. And then finally is that when we look at rural health care, we've got to take a special dispensation for that. We know that when we're dealing with miles between hospitals, there's going to have to be some assistance on a federal level to keep rural hospitals in place. Whether that be the challenges that Sheboygan faced in this media market or the challenges that Rogers City faced years ago, we've got to allow for access for those smaller hospitals.
Thank you. Mr. Bergman?
Number one, not only repeal Obamacare, but defund it. We've repealed it enough times without defunding it. So now it's time to walk the talk. Allow insurance companies to compete across state lines. The market will determine the value for the customer, and it'll return a profit to the company that's reasonable. Don't get the government into picking winners and losers. More and more doctors are working directly for hospitals. Hospitals now are controlling the kinds of hours, the kinds of procedures, everything. The doctors spend more time typing into a computer than they do actually diagnosing the patients and providing that one-on-one care that is so important for the individual to help manage their own condition. Small businesses can't afford health care. They have to leave their people to fend for themselves. Depending on the number of employees that a company has, you either pay a premium or you're exempt. The number of hours that you work a week, you're either in or you're out. Arbitrary rules that don't help the end game of the health care. Medical savings accounts promote cohesion between the company, especially the small business who's trying to provide the health care for its employees, the employees, so their sense of satisfaction, and the larger medical community within that area. 24,000 square miles, 32 counties in the 1st District. We have big hospitals, we have a lot of little rural hospitals. We have to be able to develop our own way of delivering care to our patients, especially when it's January and 20 below and ice and snow on the roads. That doesn't happen in Florida.
And why did you have to remind us of that?
It's important that we never forget the realities of what God has given us.
That's right. On the issue of Social Security and Medicare, just quickly with the time that we have, reform or privatize? Let's start with you, Mr. Bergman.
Reform or privatize Medicare? Did I get that right?
And Social Security.
And Social Security. Well, number one, I believe that over the long term, we need to privatize. Okay. But you don't do it 100% tomorrow and take those folks who are of a certain age and limit their ability to either live their life based upon what they have earned through the Social Security system or what they have available to them in Medicare. They have a limited amount of time that they can recover.
thank you. Mr. Casperson, just concisely.
Sure. The Medicare issue is something that you can't just turn off a switch and say we're going to go to this direction. Privatization is a good thing. I come from the private sector. But in something like this, we're dealing with people's health care and people that are relying on it, and especially our elderly seniors that are on retirement, on a retirement situation. You can't do that. And so I do think it needs to be something that is a long-term fix that we do uniformly across the board, but it's long-term. We can't do it overnight.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen.
There's both Social Security and Medicare?
Yeah.
Both are going to need significant reforms. The von Bismarck model of 1890 is antiquated and needs to be overhauled, and the same thing on long-term health care.
Okay, thank you very much for your conciseness, everyone. Moving on to the next question, we'll start with Jason Allen. Northeast Michigan is one of the most challenged regions of Michigan and the country in terms of economic statistics. The question is, as a freshman congressman with partisan hierarchies to contend with, what do you foresee as your role in helping Northeast Michigan move ahead economically?
Well, thank you very much, and it's partially an understanding of the importance of this area and the challenges that we're facing. We've got transportation issues, both from rail and then logistics of getting people here, and then we've got one of the 8 critical access airports available. And so we have to protect what we have available to us, and then also seriously taking a look at what the long-term strategic goals are for this region. As you know, we are struggling with modernization and the types of things that are going on in our industry, and they're doing a wonderful job, but that's declining the number of people that are employed. We went up and studied our Carmoose, and they're about a third of what they were 40 years ago, but are producing twice to a third as much. So the first issue is that we've got to communicate the needs of this area. Make sure that we understand how we are going to attract entrepreneurs, flatten the tax rate so that we are able to attract the next generation of entrepreneurs. Because heck, it's going to be hard for us to figure out what the next generation of jobs are going to be because of the modernization of technology. And then finally, make sure that we have a strong, solid health care system, because when you start looking at the base employments, health care and then education are the big areas.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bergman.
Well, first of all, to start with, from a worldwide basis, we don't have in this country a competitive market rate, income tax rate for our corporations. We're too high. If a company is considering moving anywhere in the United States, the first thing they look at is, can they make money? If they can't, then no jobs are provided, they don't come. So number one, change our corporate tax structure to provide a worldwide market-level corporate rate so that companies then can say, okay, where are the resources, whether they be natural or human? It's important and essential for our education system to produce 18-year-olds or 22-year-olds or somewhere in between that have the skill sets that when companies decide to come here to Northeast Michigan, because they really do believe that they can be successful here long term, that we've got would-be ready employees ready to do the jobs, especially in the manufacturing sector, that will allow the company to make a competitive product.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Casperson.
Yeah, we've been working on some ways to help rural Michigan that struggles with some of these things. One example would be the mining industry in the Upper Peninsula. There was a new tax put in place that we worked on, the severance tax. We put together through that tax a economic fund that's designed for local units of government to be able to petition through that fund to get some funding to bring infrastructure into our rural areas. But really the way I see that some of our rural areas in Michigan could be helped is removing some of the red tape that the very government that we're talking about has created. You talk about tax structures and all those things all day long, but if I can't get a permit to put a building up, if I can't get a permit to put a road in, if I can't build some of that infrastructure that we need because of the red tape and the rules and the regulations that's been put in place by this government, the rest of it doesn't matter. And there's a lot at stake here with our rural areas, and this region is no different. In talking to the people here, they struggle with the same things. And if we can clear that red tape out of the way, we talked earlier about the natural resources. Prime example is our natural resources can be a huge draw for these areas. And if we can't use those natural resources and we can't enjoy them and go out and they're blocking trails, things like that, not a big draw for people to come into the area. We've got to change that mindset, and we need to listen to what the local people are telling us and what they want for their economic development opportunities. And again, Washington doesn't seem to want to do that. They seem to know better what we need. I think we got to get back to listening, and our local people can figure it out, and we need to get out of the way and let them do it.
Okay, thank you. On to the next topic and question. We'll start with Mr. Bergman on this. It's a little bit of a different topic than you're probably used to having posed in one of these situations. Michigan has been subject to gerrymandering throughout its history. Both parties are guilty of engaging in the partisanship that impacts our state and federal districting. What should or could be done to stem the tide of partisan dominance in redistricting every 10 years?
Are you really asking what should be done to change how the political parties operate in the state and the federal level?
And affect the way in which our districts are drawn and ultimately how our choices are shaped?
If you look at how our country was formed, it was formed as a representative democracy. Our founding fathers had to make decisions based on populations, locales, and they started that process back in the 1770s. We have taken that process and pretty much subverted it, I could probably use a stronger word, to local and individual desires and needs. Some could say parochial. So I would suggest to you that we have a constitution. We have all these rules. Rules probably isn't the right word. We have all these tenets in place that we can work within. We are wasting time every 10 years to figure out how we can one-up the other party by doing this. Let's face it, this will be the third, I believe, the third election that Traverse City has voted in the 1st District. I could be wrong, but bottom line is, was that the right answer? I tell you what, after traveling the 1st District for the last 5 months, I can tell you that it's a long way from Copper Harbor to Alpena County in Harrisville. So bottom line is, if they're going to gerrymander in such a way, give their representative a plane. By the way, I'll fly it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Casperson.
Yes, I think the only way you're going to get there is you have to have some type of independence involved, because either side, if they have the control, are going to deal with it as they see fit, and that seems to be the way the process has worked. So if there's a way we could come up with an independent type of a scenario to make that work, that probably would be the answer to all this. If you're in the majority, you like the way the system is just the way it is. If you're in the minority, you don't like it, and it doesn't matter who's in control because both sides feel the same way about it. So to me, the only real solution long term would be to look at something that we could all agree on that would be a neutral type of an entity that really deals with it, but we also have to stay within the parameters of our Constitution. And if there's changes that need to be made there, that's a heavy lift, but then that needs to be looked at. But I don't see how you solve the impression of what some people might have because of the party system we have and the way it's set up. Both sides will feel that way depending on what position they're in at any given time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen.
Historically, the state of Michigan has used a set of standards that were developed, if I remember correctly, during the Blanchard or late Milliken era. And that was a set of standards put together and tested through the courts called the APOL standards, talking about the basis of the breaks. This is a state issue based on decisions that are made by the state legislature, given powers through the Constitution to the local state authorities to make those decisions. So as the different plans and things are developed, certainly we will listen, but it does not have a lot of bearing on this issue because it's determined by the state legislature. Now, there are several different models that have gone on. North Dakota has one that is similar to just basically looking at populations. There's other ones that have committees. There are other groups that go about in doing it, ultimately winding up in court cases. The standards that have gone through here have held up a lot in the courts, although they are not perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. Just quickly, since we have a little bit of time here, any thoughts on term limits for U.S. congressmen? Let's start with Mr. Bergman. Just quickly, yes or no? Yes.
I'd repeal the 17th Amendment to start with.
Okay.
And let it go downhill, trickle down from there.
All right. Mr. Casperson.
Yes, if we can include departments and bureaucrats, because right now, if we do it, we give them the control. If there's a way to do it both ways, I'm all in.
Okay, Mr. Allen?
In Michigan, we are seeing the effects of term limits, which have been very dramatic, because of what is happening is that bureaucrats are outweighing the legislature. And the only way that you're going to have a viable program is that to have some sort of a system in place where you have mandatory retirement of the bureaucrats and the lobbyists. And so I'm very hesitant to go even forward into the discussion on term limits in Washington if we've got to change where the direction of this nation is headed.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Last question, and we will begin with Mr. Casperson. Regardless of a Clinton or Trump presidency, what role does Congress have with regard to foreign policy, and what policy agendas do you think are most important to your constituents in this district?
You're talking about the foreign policy part of it? Yeah. I think the Congress role is the purse strings in budgets. And I would hope whoever the next president is, based on everything that's happening in Washington with the dysfunctionality that we're seeing, that there would be a partnership formed in that decisions that are being made out of Washington, they start partnering. Because when you take a look at Congress or the Senate, all those folks were put in there by the people, just like the president was. We see that same thing going on in Lansing. If we could form partnerships, these policies could get worked out. What's happening is there's a divide going on right now, and we see that over and over. And so the administration seems to hold its ground. They want to do it their way. Congress disagrees, so there's this battle going on. I think our role is to find a way to blend together and work together as a team instead of this division that we keep seeing in Washington. I think if you form the team and everybody's concern is what's best for this country instead of what's best for our party or what's best for my position, whether it be Congress, Senate, or the White House, we'll see some real improvements within our governing, and I think we'll come up with the answers that are needed to do the right thing on behalf of the United States.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, and I think the issues that we've got to take a look at is how we are going to be able to govern when we have not had any serious discussions on budgets. Continuing resolutions continue to be passed and are not allowing for fair and open debate, whether it's involving military equipment, the types of policies that we're moving forward. And so either in one of the two presidencies, we have to have a serious discussion on where we are headed, because national security and our deficit are great threats to this nation. At $19 trillion, it's inexcusable for us to be taking a look at any kind of other programs until we come up with a program to pay those down. Once we have a serious budget discussion, taking a look at making sure our borders are secure, then we can start planning for the future. But until those types of activities take place, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bergman.
I would suggest to you that foreign policy strategy in a world in which we live today is an ever-moving target, but nonetheless a target that has to be tracked. For the last 8 years, we have basically lumbered along in our country without a national security strategy, which drives, to some extent, the foreign policy in how our ambassadors and our security teams can operate around the world. During my last 6 years recalled to active duty, I was based in different areas, D.C., some overseas. I had a chance to talk to many ambassadors about the challenges they have with the security strategy coupling with the foreign policy strategy. So we need an administration that actually understands what it means to be a good ally, what it means to actually know how to handle classified material, what it means to actually make a decision where lives of our ambassadors and our contractors and our troops are in jeopardy, and to make sure that our response time and what we do to protect not only our businesses and our families abroad, but also to protect our allies and our young men and women in uniform. Okay. We've been lacking in that the last 8 years.
Okay, thank you. Just another question related to foreign policy, but bringing it home. You know we have a Alpena Combat Readiness Training Center here, and there are 4 training bases as part of the Air National Guard. There are always threats of closing one or any of all of these. Would you protect the Alpena site relative to the other 3? Mr. Casperson, I'm sorry, Mr.
Sure.
Casperson.
Yes. That's a prime example of the dysfunction that's going on in Washington right now, because as they look at ways to cut government, they're taking a look at our military, and they're cutting the military. I think military is a priority. There's other ways we could do this and other budgets we should be looking at.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen.
I would protect it because of the logic involved. Sometimes defense has to make some difficult cuts. But let's take a look at the characteristics. We have the largest airspace over Lake Huron. We have a large munitions area that can pretty much take any type of ordnance that's available within the U.S. military. And with our largest training range east of the Mississippi, it's invaluable.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bergman.
The government puts out satellite bases around the world, and the bottom line is we put them there so we can reach out and touch people who want to harm us. Where we are here in Alpena, we have extensive borders that need to be secured. So our base here is subject to growth and more involvement as we secure our borders for the future.
Okay, thank you. We move now to closing statements. You each have 30 seconds. Mr. Bergman, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks for being here tonight. All of you out there in the netherworld. On August 2nd, the voters must make a choice. First of all, I ask yourself, is our party system working? And then, depending on what you say to that question, do you vote for a familiar name and hope that they can do the job, or someone who might be a new name but already has extensive experience, both international and national, maybe even a Marine Corps general? Said a different way, who do you think will really fight for you in Congress? I'm Jack Bergman. On August 2nd, I ask for your vote. God bless America.
Thank you. Mr. Casperson.
Thank you. Thanks for putting this together, and to all the listeners. I have been born and raised in northern Michigan. My family's been raised here. It is part of the fabric of who I am. My life experience in a small business brings the experience that I bring to the legislature, and that's what I would bring to Washington, and bring some common sense back to this district and have Washington listen to us. And I'm asking for your support on August 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, both to the community college and your involvement in WBKB. For 50 years, our family has run a small men's clothing store in Traverse City, very similar to Stevens Menswear in downtown Alpena. I understand the challenges that the 190,000 small businesses of Michigan face on a regular basis, struggling to be able to compete. We have to move our region forward. You can find more out about me at jasonallen.com, and I would appreciate your vote on August 2nd.
Thank you, gentlemen. On behalf of WBKB, thank you for your interest in tonight's forum. The last date to register for the August primary was July 5th. To vote in the November election, you must be registered to vote by October 11th. Visit your local Secretary of State office and register to vote. Your vote helps determine who represents us in our representative system of government. Thank you and good night.